Welcome back, focused learners, to another edition of The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking one of the absolute biggest evolutions in modern project strategy, the shift to the PMBOK 8th edition. Specifically, we're zooming right in on the performance domains of people and uncertainty, which you probably know by their traditional names, resources and risk. Listen, whether you're a C-suite executive driving a massive organizational transformation, a program manager trying to navigate complex deliveries, or a PMP examinee getting ready to ace those new standards, this explainer is built exactly for you. We're looking at a massive fundamental paradigm shift here. Process is taking a backseat, and mindset is what's truly driving results.
To respect your time, here is our executive agenda. First, we'll cover the overarching mindset shift. Second, harnessing human capability. Third, building the resilience quotient. Fourth, we'll trace the golden thread that connects all of these domains together. And finally, engineering an auditable culture, which is where we'll show you exactly how to operationalize and measure these changes right there in the boardroom.
Okay, let's dive into this first section and look at the macro-level structural updates driving this entirely new standard.
What we're seeing in the new framework is just a brilliant streamlining. We're moving from 12 principles down to 6 and from 8 domains to 7. But hey, make no mistake, while the structure is condensed to give us high-pressure agility, the true evolution here isn't just about having fewer bullet points to memorize, right? The real story is the complete departure from rigid, checklist-driven processes. Success in today's environment doesn't rely on executing some perfect, inflexible, set-in-stone plan anymore. It relies entirely on human capability and the inherent resilience you need to navigate the unknown.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between legacy management and this new adaptive ecosystem approach. Just look at how the focus areas evolve. We aren't just allocating resources anymore, we're empowering capability. We aren't treating people as interchangeable headcount on a spreadsheet. They are incredibly valuable social capital. And critically, risk is no longer just a threat that we have to mitigate. It's actually an opportunity for value creation. This is a massive shift from process-oriented management to mindset-oriented leadership, and it directly impacts exactly how you measure a project's success.
That brings us right to our second focus, harnessing human capability. Let's look at how the specific tactics within the resources domain literally have to evolve to match this new reality.
So in the past, the resources domain was modeled as a highly traditional manager-led hierarchy. You had your boxes on an org chart, and people were, well, treated like interchangeable gears in a machine. PMBOK 8 leaves that completely behind. We are moving toward a team-led ecosystem. The whole focus shifts to building social capital. You see, this domain is inextricably linked to building an empowered culture. You simply cannot succeed in this new framework without psychological safety, decentralized decision-making, and long-term social sustainability. You aren't managing blocks of time anymore. You are cultivating a dynamic, living network of human intelligence.
For the senior leaders and auditors tuning in with us, this is absolutely crucial. This strategic transition demands way more than just a new vocabulary. You can't just slap a people operations sign on your HR department's door and expect different results. Building real human capability and social capital requires tangible shifts in authority. It means you have to push decision-making power out to the edges of your ecosystem, where the information actually lives. And you have to foster the psychological safety necessary for your teams to take calculated risks without this looming fear of retribution.
So how do we actually handle those risks? Well, that leads us perfectly into our third section, focusing on the risk and uncertainty domain and how we have to move far, far beyond the traditional limitations of a simple risk register.
PMBOK 8 makes a really vital distinction here, and every single project manager and sponsor needs to deeply understand it. Risk represents specific, known events that we can plan for, like, say, a key vendor delivering a week late. But uncertainty is the broader, completely unpredictable environment we're forced to navigate. Think of a sudden global supply chain collapse. You can put a risk on a spreadsheet. You absolutely cannot put uncertainty on a spreadsheet. Navigating uncertainty requires a completely different organizational muscle.
Here's exactly what that paradigm shift looks like in practice. Under the traditional risk umbrella, we manage identifiable threats with a static register, and our whole goal is to plan and mitigate. But under the PMBOK's uncertainty umbrella, the paradigm completely flips. The unknown actually becomes a value opportunity. Your primary tool isn't a document anymore. It's your organization's resilience quotient. The required action isn't mitigation. It's adapting and bouncing back. For executives, this means risk is no longer just playing defense. It is a full-on offensive strategy.
And this brilliantly illustrates the timeline of a disruption event.
The traditional response, which you can see is that lower gray line, reacts to a system shock with a massive drop in value delivery, followed by this really slow, painful recovery to a permanently lowered capacity. But the PMBOK resilience quotient, that top gold line, absorbs the shock, adapts, and actually leverages that uncertainty to reach an even higher state of value delivery. It's all about an organization's inherent ability to dynamically respond when the unexpected hits.
Bouncing back stronger is the ultimate goal of adaptive value delivery. Activating that resilience quotient makes your project literally anti-fragile. While a fragile traditional risk register approach flatlines or degrades after a major system shock, an empowered ecosystem actually uses the disruption to innovate and climb right above their baseline performance. You are literally turning risk into an engine for value. How cool is that?
Section 4. The golden thread. Because of course, none of these concepts exist in a vacuum. Let's explore how these evolved domains integrate systemically to drive serious project success.
This right here is where the magic happens. We've got an accountable leader and an empowered culture driving our resources domain. We have a holistic view and an eye on sustainability driving how we navigate uncertainty. But notice what sits right at the dead center of this integration: value. Systemic thinking demands that every single decision you make regarding your people and every strategy you deploy regarding uncertainty must constantly and relentlessly trace back to continuous value creation.
I want to pause on this for just a second. Risk is the cost of seeking value. Think about that. This is one of the most powerful systemic thinking concepts in the entire PMBOK update. You literally cannot seek out high-value opportunities without inherently embracing uncertainty. And you can't navigate that uncertainty without an empowered culture. They are deeply structurally connected. If you want the value, you have to pay the toll. And that toll is managing uncertainty through an empowered, resilient workforce.
Let's move to our final section and see how this builds into something highly practical. Because as great as all this high-level strategy sounds, if you can't measure it, it's just corporate poetry, right? Let's talk about engineering and auditable culture.
One of the biggest criticisms of this idea of empowerment has always been that it's too soft, too subjective to actually govern. Well, PMBOK-H changes that entirely. The framework starts with the intent, which is psychological safety. Then it moves to the mechanism, decentralized decision-making. And finally, we arrive at the artifacts, real audit-ready evidence. The massive governance benefit here is that it's actually much easier for a PMO or an auditor to verify decentralized decision-making processes than it is to rely on subjective employee culture surveys.
So you might be wondering, what do those artifacts actually look like? Well, if you're auditing an empowered culture, you stop looking at timesheets and you start looking at capability development processes and skills mapping. You stop counting the sheer quantity of risks logged and start looking at system shock recovery metrics, like how fast did the team pivot? And to prove psychological safety, you look at decentralized decision logs. Are decisions actually being made by the team on the ground, or is every minor pivot still waiting for a sponsor's signature? That is how you prove true empowerment.
Ultimately, we have to bridge that gap between strategic leadership and strict governance. In the boardroom, senior leaders have to ask the hard questions. Are we building real team capability or just managing headcount? Is our risk approach creating resilience, or are we just ticking boxes? And on the audit dashboard, we prove the answers to those exact questions. By making culture tangibly auditable through capability processes, decision logs, and resilience metrics, we completely solve those legacy challenges of command and control bottlenecks.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought as you evaluate the maturity of your own organizational ecosystem. Look around at your current projects, your current teams, and your current response to the unexpected. Are you building real team capability? Are you investing in the social capital that's going to make you resilient in the face of uncertainty? Or are you simply managing headcount, just waiting for the next disruption to permanently lower your capacity? The framework is here. The choice is yours. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer, and as always, keep learning.
Earning reinforcement.
For decades, project managers have stared at spreadsheets, assigning names to tasks as if people were interchangeable gears in a predictable machine. But modern project environments don't function like rigid clockwork. They operate as dynamic, interconnected ecosystems. When we treat our teams as static inventory and pretend the future is perfectly predictable, projects stall the moment friction occurs. We have already mapped out the governance, stakeholders, and planning domains. Today, in video 6 of our series, we are zooming in on the final 2 core areas of the PMBOK 8 framework, the resources domain and the risk and uncertainty domain. Navigating these final 2 sections requires stepping away from checklist management and adopting a highly adaptable leadership mindset. In PMBOK 8, the resources domain undergoes a structural overhaul. The standard steps away from managing headcount or strictly allocating labor hours. We move from a rigid hierarchy into a decentralized web, focusing on human capability and social capital. This builds an empowered culture where teams solve problems at the node level. Failure happens when legacy managers force agile networks back into rigid command and control silos. Senior leaders must recognize that an empowered culture is an objective operational strategy driven by specific, measurable team capabilities and decentralized decision-making. This raises a critical question for the boardroom. How do executives and auditors objectively verify that an empowered culture actually exists on a project? You don't look at an employee sentiment survey. You look at the project artifacts. This checklist shows an auditor reviewing a physical decision log. What they are verifying is that critical choices are being made by individual team members on the ground, rather than being escalated. Tracking where decisions are actually logged proves whether psychological safety is real. It translates the abstract concept of culture into a strictly auditable project process. PMBOK 8 splits our future view. On the left, risk, specific events we quantify and plan for. On the right, uncertainty, the unpredictable fog of war with completely unknown threats. To survive, we build a resilience quotient to absorb sudden shocks and bounce back. Let's test this concept. If your project faces a sudden, completely unforeseen global supply chain freeze, is that a risk or an uncertainty? And which PMBOK 8 principle should guide your response? Because there is no specific historical data or mitigation plan for a collapse of this scale, it is an uncertainty. Solving it requires a holistic view to identify dependencies across the entire supply ecosystem and the sustainability principle to ensure team and partner relationships remain viable through the duration of the shock. Systemic thinking recognizes that risk is the intrinsic cost of seeking value. Every pursuit of a high-value outcome carries a price of uncertainty that must be navigated, rather than simply mitigated. When high-stakes disruptions hit, a project survives because we combined capability empowerment with a high resilience quotient, allowing the team to adapt in real time. This boardroom cheat sheet maps the core transitions. The outdated model relied on managing headcount, mitigating specific risks, and ticking boxes. The PMBOK 8 standard demands capability empowerment, building a resilience quotient, and focusing entirely on value delivery. Making this shift replaces a rigid compliance mentality with the exact flexibility needed for sustainable value delivery. To apply these frameworks to your own team, download the PMBOK 8 governance checklist from the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our finale, video 7, where we provide a complete PMBOK 7 versus 8 comparison. Navigating human capability and uncertainty converts raw complexity into organizational value. This transition from process tracking to strategic navigation defines the modern project leader. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the final video.